Welcome to Newsmakers, a co-production between the Epoch Times and NTD. I'm Joshua Phillip.
And I'm Tiffany Meyer. We have a great lineup of guests for you tonight, covering some of the big headlines in the news. We'll bring them on shortly. But first, Josh, what have you been following?
Well, political censorship is taking a big blow just ahead of the midterms. Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter is doing a lot more than just relieving political censorship ahead of the midterms. It's also exposing that Twitter executives may have lied to the court about bot accounts on the platform. Now, this is bringing attention to Homeland Security programs to police online speech. In an October 20 tweet, Musk published screenshots of chat messages from Twitter's head of trust and safety, stating that user data was entirely based on fraudulent metrics, and that the company was, quote, literally doing what Elon Musk is accusing us of doing. Musk wrote that the Twitter board deliberately hid this evidence from the court and said more information would be released soon. Now, these messages were allegedly provided to Musk and date back to May 17th, which would be around the same time that Musk questioned whether Twitter was hiding its real user count under the guise of spam bots. Now, this eventually led Musk to put deals on hold with the purchase of Twitter, and then faced lawsuits himself before he finally went through with the purchase of Twitter. Now, the findings could lead to additional lawsuits that will punch holes in the golden parachutes of top executives who were fired by Musk when he purchased the company. And the revelation of what was taking place behind the closed doors at Twitter don't end there. Just following Musk's takeover of the company, he allegedly assigned staff from Tesla to review Twitter's code. And then he locked the former Twitter engineers out of the system. While it's still unclear what he may be looking for, a review of the code could reveal whether Twitter was engaging in politically biased censorship. And this is also becoming especially relevant with lawsuits and new revelations exposing how the U.S. government has been working with platforms, including Meta and Twitter, on censorship. Now, this includes recent findings from The Intercept, which revealed a large-scale program being run out of the Department of Homeland Security to censor what it claims is disinformation. And this is on topics ranging from the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic to the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. A major legal question is going to be whether the government censoring speech through a private company would violate constitutional protections on free speech.
And actually, on that note, later tonight, we'll be hearing from Devin Nunes on that. He's, of course, a former U.S. representative and chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. He'll be joining us to discuss Twitter, what it means for free speech, and potentially national security. Now, we are heading straight to the midterms, and Americans are already going to the polls. More than 20 million ballots have already been cast. That's as of Sunday, according to data from election officials. Now, what about what issues Americans care about? Well, that varies by poll. Let's take a look at some of them. Out of control. That's how 8 in 10 likely voters feel things in the country are today. That's according to a new CBS poll. As for specific issues, economy and inflation rank top. Crime came next. An ABC Ipsos poll released Sunday shows the economy, inflation, and abortion as the top issues. 50% of registered voters cite the economy or inflation as their single most important issue. But that changes along party lines. For Republican voters, the vast majority cited the economy or inflation. For Democrats, abortion ranked top, followed by the economy. And for independents, half cited the economy or inflation. Speaking of the economy, one area Americans have been feeling it is at the gas pump. President Biden on Monday accusing oil companies of war profiteering as he floated the idea of new taxes. Biden pointing to the profits these companies raked in, saying, "Profits so high, it's hard to believe." The Associated Press reporting that these taxes would fall on the largest producers and hit earnings that are in the excess of their typical annual profits. Did these companies actually rake in profits? Exxon did hit a new record in the 152 years it's been around, pulling in nearly $20 billion in profits the last quarter. Chevron also did well, its second best quarter on record with over $11 billion. To put that in perspective, Exxon's full-year profits are on track to surpass Amazon, P&G, and Tesla combined. That's according to Bloomberg. And this isn't the first time that Exxon has found itself in the middle of Biden's crosshairs. Back in June, he said Exxon made more money than God this year. That being said, Axios notes these new taxes on oil companies have a pretty slim chance of making it through Congress. That says it appears likely that Republicans win either the House and/or the Senate in the upcoming midterms. However, the other restrictions that Biden mentioned are still unknown. And it goes on to note that Biden officials haven't ruled out going after fossil fuel exports themselves. Seems there's a lot to think about in those terms. And joining us now actually to discuss this and the midterms that are coming up is Nathan Brandt. Nathan Brandt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Tina.
Nathan, a lot of Republicans are worried about election fraud. One of the big concerns I've been hearing, people think their votes won't count. What would you say to these voters?
Well, under the leadership of Ronna McDaniel here at the Republican National Committee, we have been ultimately and very aggressive in our efforts to combat voter fraud, make it easier to cheat but harder to harder to cheat but easier to vote. So across the country, we have now filed 75 election-related lawsuits across the country. Most recently today in Wisconsin, where they're trying to make sure that our poll watchers are not able to get to the view of the ballots, we are suing to make sure those poll watchers have access. In places like Michigan, we are taking action in court right now to make sure there is an equal number of Republican and Democrat poll workers. So everywhere we turn, we are taking efforts to make sure Republicans, Independents, even Democrats feel comfortable in the results of this election, because it is so important that voters everywhere turn out. And if you're looking to get involved, go to vote.gop right now, and that's how you yourself can go out and find where your polling location is and feel confident that your vote is going to count on Election Day.
And on that note, Nathan, it seems polling is suggesting that Republicans have a good shot at retaking the House and potentially the Senate. Others are warning to not get too confident. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, we take nothing for granted at this point, but you're absolutely right. And some of the polls you introduced at the top there are correct. When you look at the issues that matter most to voters, the inflation, it's crime, it's the economy, and those are the issues that Republicans are talking about up and down the ballot. So whether or not you're looking at Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania or Herschel Walker in Georgia or Adam Laxalt in Nevada, they are focused on the issues that matter most to voters. And that's why we feel very confident in our chances on Election Day. So every vote matters. Everyone needs to make a plan to vote as a result. And as you are looking at those issues, one thing to keep in mind is you're talking with your neighbors who are undecided. And a lot of those polls you mentioned, there's 3 areas that these undecided voters fall in. One, they disapprove of the president. They are not happy with the direction of this country the president has sent us in. Joe Biden is sitting around a 43% approval rating. Second, their top issue remains inflation. They are concerned about the cost of living and the rising prices across the country. And third, these people ultimately favor a Republican on the generic ballot. So they are deciding whether or not they want to vote for Republicans still, but they are looking like they are going to be in our camp. That's why we are so confident, but we need every voter to turn out for us to make sure this turns into a red wave on next Tuesday.
One of the big narratives going on right now, Democrats are alleging that Republican talking points are leading to threats of violence, and they're using the recent attack on Paul Pelosi as an example of this. What's your response to this?
No, it's a great question, and Ronna McDaniel and Republicans have been quick to denounce the violence. But it's important to remember that their criticism of Republicans is ultimately not fair. These are the same Democrats which led to the assassination attempt of Brett Kavanaugh. Your viewers recall Steve Scalise getting shot in 2017. The language and rhetoric from the Democrat side has not cooled down whatsoever. And if you remember the Trump years, every single day there were threats made against Donald Trump. So I think there is a real call for temperature to get lowered across our country, but some of the Democrat claims at this point are truly over the top and unfair and disrespectful to so many Republican voters across the country.
And Nathan, voters are wondering that if Republicans win, whether they'll launch their own investigation. So, for example, into January 6th, and whether they'll impeach or try to impeach Biden. So others are saying this won't happen. Any word on this?
Yeah, and this was Kevin McCarthy, who's the head of the Republican conference right now in the House. He put forward a plan with broad support across the House Republicans that are currently there right now, saying if we take back the House, we will make a commitment to America. And one of those key pillars of this is we are going to launch several investigations. Some of the topics you touched on, but also looking at Mayorkas and the border crisis. There's millions of illegal immigrants coming across our border right now, and this Biden administration has failed at every turn to acknowledge that there's even a crisis at hand. They've refused to use the word even crisis. The origins of COVID. This is a great example of what a Republican majority will be investigating. They feel that Biden and his administration has given China a pass on this, given many at Health and Human Services and NIH a pass on this. So they want answers. Americans deserve answers on the origins of COVID. So no, I believe those, Hunter Biden, January 6th, whatever it might be, I think there needs to be transparency from this Biden administration, and we are not getting it right now. And House Republicans, Senate Republicans are demanding exactly that.
Hey, Nathan, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, I really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much.
Yeah, well, it's interesting stuff. One thing I've been talking to, I of course talk to my viewers quite often. One thing I've been hearing a lot of is it seems there's two Republican parties right now. Democrats, meanwhile, are kind of lockstep. They tend to work for the far left and the centrist. They tend to work pretty much on the same issues. Republicans, you have the more Reagan-era Republicans. Some people call them rhinos. And then you have the Trump Republicans, who are a little stronger in their rhetoric and so on. It seems that a lot of the voters want Republicans to be stronger, although I know there's also pushback from some of the more centrist ones as well. So it's going to be interesting how they navigate this. Now, folks, coming up after the break, one of the legal experts we have with us is going to be joining us to discuss numerous lawsuits filed in relation to the upcoming midterms. Now, election integrity is one of the big things on people's minds, and we'll explore some of those concerns after the break. Hey, welcome back to Newsmakers. The days are ticking down to the midterms, which will determine the control of Congress. But on top of that, another looming question on many people's minds: can we trust the election results? Election day is November 8th, but legal challenges have already begun. More than 100 lawsuits have been filed this year relating to the midterm elections, and these mostly stem from Republican challenges targeting early voting, voter access, voting machines, voting registration, the counting of mismarked absentee ballots, and access for partisan poll watchers. And joining us now to give insight to these legal challenges is Kaylin Phillips, Litigation Counsel of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. Now, I guess first of all, I want to talk to you about some of the election challenges we have. A lot of people are wondering whether their votes even count right now. And I know there's two sides to this. Republicans claim that there was widespread election fraud. Democrats claim it wasn't there. What's your take on this?
Well, we at the Public Interest Legal Foundation just put out a new tool tracking elections that ended in ties to show you that your vote matters. One vote does matter. And it is critically important that an illegal vote, a mistake, or an error does not determine the winner of an election.
And Kaylee, it seems like the midterms aren't even here yet, but there are already legal challenges. And so there's more than 100 lawsuits have been filed so far. What are the concerns here?
Well, overarching everything is the concern that this election will be run in a free and fair manner. So especially in 2020, many people were concerned about how the election was run. My organization, we're the nation's public interest election integrity law firm. We focus only on election integrity, and we've been doing this since well before 2020. But we definitely saw more people concerned after the 2020 election and all of the changes that were made to how the elections were conducted in light of COVID.
Now, it seems after the 2020 presidential election, there were several legal challenges The left's argument is that there was no real evidence, which is why the judges throughout the cases, if you talk to people on the right, they argue that there was evidence, but the judges didn't look at the evidence. What's your take on this? What's the real situation here?
Well, our new report showing that tie elections do happen, I think is an important reminder to everyone that your vote matters. Every vote matters. One vote can make the difference. And so it is critically important that you go out and vote, no matter what concerns you might have had about how elections were conducted in the past.
Well, and on that too, I think one of the big concerns people also have is that some of the, let's say, election laws in the country were loosened ahead of the 2020 elections. And with that as well, people are arguing that there's a big case on whether or not the state legislatures control the election, or whether the federal government does, or whether the governors control it. And I know there's a big kind of fight legally happening between this. Do you see a possible Supreme Court ruling clarifying who's in charge of the elections? Is it the state legislatures or otherwise? Do you see this having a big impact on any kind of potential fraud taking place?
I certainly don't see that happening before this upcoming election. So in regards to the 2022 midterms, I think that the main takeaway is that it is critically important that you show up and vote in person, ideally, is my opinion, to ensure that your vote is counted and that your voice is being heard.
And Kaylee, it seems a lot of the concerns is around the, say, absentee ballots or mail-in voting. So what would your advice be to the concerned citizen?
Well, if possible, you can track your vote in certain states, track your mail-in ballot. There are certain steps that you can take to make sure that your ballot is received. And also there are certain states, every state's different, but certain states allow you to vote in person even if you've requested but not voted on your absentee ballot. So check your state's rules and see if there's still time for you to be able to vote on Election Day.
Hey, Kaylin Phillips, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's big stuff, actually. One of the big points I keep hearing get brought up is that there's going to be both Republican and Democrat poll watchers. I know Republicans are saying that, when it comes to the poll watchers, they're claiming that they want to have a balance. They want to have just as many Republicans there as they do Democrats, as we've been discussing. Democrats are saying that actually constitutes a type of fraud in and of itself, which is really raising some big questions over, what do they call fraud in that case? There's arguments on both sides claiming one type of fraud or another. The Democrat narrative when it comes to what constitutes fraud is not fraud as the Republicans say, which would be actual manipulation of votes and so on, but instead what they say, restricting voter access or doing things like having a balance between Republicans and Democrats actually watching the polls. Yeah, interesting rhetoric depending on which side you're on. And after the break, Montana Attorney General Austin Knudsen joins us to talk about the fast approaching diesel shortage, as well as measures his state and several others are taking against environmental social governance, commonly known as ESG. All that after the break.
Welcome back to Newsmakers. Are we facing a diesel shortage here in America? Several southeastern states could be hit. That's according to major fuel supply company Mansfield Energy. States that are expected to see shortages include Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, and South Carolina. The company also noted extremely high prices in the Northeast. How did we get here? We've been living it. The pandemic squeezed supply chains. The bottlenecks caused by the lockdowns have only added to rising energy prices. Data released recently show the Consumer Price Index, a key inflation metric, has risen 8.2% year over year in September, and Americans are feeling the pain at the pump. In response, the White House has released tens of millions of barrels of oil from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, bringing it down to the lowest levels in decades. Republicans are blaming the Biden administration for its policies. Meanwhile, Democrats and President Biden blame Russia's war in Ukraine and oil companies profiteering off the war. Joining us now to discuss is Montana Attorney General Austin Knudsen. Attorney General Knudsen, thank you so much for joining us.
We've heard these reports about, 28 days left of diesel, and honestly, people are kind of freaking out about this. Is this true? And I mean, what does this mean for the shipping industry?
This is true, and it's frankly terrifying. We're at less than a month's supply of diesel fuel in this country. To put this in perspective, we haven't had a diesel shortage this major since 1951. And that was actually at about parity of where we are now. But what you have to realize is we have much higher demand for diesel fuel today than we did in 1951. This should concern everybody in the shipping industry, the freight industry, trucking, railroads. But look, I'm a farmer. My family's farming in eastern Montana. You can't produce food for this country without diesel fuel. Tractors, farm implements, they all run on diesel fuel. They've yet to create an electric-powered tractor with that you can grow food like we need to in this country. That just doesn't exist. So this is very concerning to anyone in production agriculture, in the shipping industry, in manufacturing. This is going to have tremendous ripple across our economy.
Well, and one thing I've been asked also is, I mean, how many days do we have left? That report that came out that said 28 days was about 2 weeks ago. How many days do we have left? And why are we not hearing more about this? Like, what can we actually expect from this?
Well, we can expect higher prices. I mean, I read a story this morning where, basically over-the-road truck drivers are not making any kind of profit. Specifically, your small over-the-road truck drivers that are their own independent businesses, they're making very little money, which has to beg the question, why keep doing it? And that's just going to further exacerbate our supply chain problems in this country. Truckers are the lifeblood of this country, and those trucks run on diesel fuel. They don't run on fairy dust and rainbows. We have to have diesel fuel to power this economy, to move commerce, to move goods across the country. Again, they've yet to come up with a good electric-powered semi-tractor that can haul the kind of loads that we need hauled in our economy.
And Attorney General, it seems with all of these concerns coming up, what role does, say, ESG and other policies play in all this?
It plays a tremendous role, and this is why you see my office and roughly 19, 20 of my colleagues and other state attorneys general pushing back on ESG. This is coming about because, frankly, liberals and Democrats can't get their agenda passed through Congress. So what do? Well, they turn to their buddies in big business and in big banking. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing a strong move to stop investment into traditional energy production in this country, whether that's coal, whether that's oil and gas. Again, the lifeblood of our country, the lifeblood of our economy, and you've got liberal big business interests trying to divest away from those industries. So we shouldn't be surprised when we see that those industries are disincentivized from producing more of what we need in this country. They're under full-out attack, not just from the administration, but from this administration's friends in big banking.
Well, on the note of ESG, again, environmental, social, and governance investing in policies around this. Attorney General, you're part of a coalition of states that's investigating banks for ceding authority to the United Nations over this issue specifically. I mean, what exactly are you investigating with the United Nations being involved with this?
Well, that's a great question, and we're really starting to just peel the layers of the onion back on this. But we're talking about the Net Zero Global Banking Alliance. This is an initiative born out of the United Nations, and I'll note that the UN has absolutely zero legal authority in the state of Montana or any other state in this country. But for whatever reasons, we're seeing the largest 5 or 6 banks in the U.S. adopt this policy that's being promulgated by the United Nations to again go into this fairy tale land of zero emissions, zero carbon emissions, and basically try to starve out traditional energy production and those industries in the U.S. And that's very, very dangerous to a state like Montana. and to a lot of my other sister states and my fellow attorneys general. That's why we've gone into this civil investigation. We're asking for some information. Just how deep does the UN's tentacles go into these banks?
And would that be illegal if the UN is involved with this?
It very well may be. I can't speak for other states, but I can speak for Montana. I mean, we certainly might have consumer protection laws in Montana that are being violated. You might have fiduciary laws that are being violated. If you're a shareholder in a production company, an oil production company, and that might just be through your state pension as a state employee, you might have investments in that. That company owes a fiduciary obligation to invest your money, and so does that bank. When you invest your money and put it in a bank, they owe you a fiduciary obligation under the law to invest your money wisely and in a method that's going to make you money. They should be looking at profit. They should be not looking at social justice. They should be not looking at these idealistic fairy tale ideas being pushed out of Washington, D.C. But those are the kind of laws that we're going to investigate and see if Montana law is being broken here.
Hey, Attorney General, thanks for being with us.
Hey, you bet. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you know, it's pretty wild stuff. One thing I've been hearing more and more of actually is UN involvement of other international organizations, and even U.S. states. And one of the big questions is well, where does jurisdiction begin and where does jurisdiction end here? Are we even a sovereign nation? Are we even a country if the United Nations is what's directing policies here? You know, it's crazy times we're in, Tiffany. But folks, after the break, we have former Republican Congressman and CEO of Truth Social, Devin Nunes. He's going to join us to talk about Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter. All that after the break.
Welcome back to Newsmakers. We're going to talk about Twitter now. Are Twitter employees no longer called tweeps? Elon Musk, who completed his takeover of Twitter recently, issued a notice that from now on, employees will be known as twits instead. But that's not what has been making headlines. Musk has said that he might change Twitter's so-called content moderation policies, meaning he'd loosen them to allow more free speech. He's complained before about Twitter censoring so much content, and Musk's critics worry about what may lie ahead. Over the weekend, Musk found himself in hot water after he posted about the attack on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband. Musk has since deleted the post without saying why. But he did post a screenshot of a New York Times headline reporting he had shared a link from a site known to publish false news. "This is fake," Musk shot back. "I did not tweet out a link to the New York Times." What does this mean for free speech? Meanwhile, blue checks, or those verified on Twitter, could soon be shelling out money to keep their blue badges. News broke early this week of Musk's apparent plan to charge anywhere from $5 to $20 per month for verified users to keep the blue check marks. And it seems Musk isn't stopping there. He mused to his 112 million Twitter followers about bringing back Vine. That's after Twitter shut it down in 2016. Vine, popular for its 6-second videos, could be a potential challenger to TikTok. And joining us now to discuss is former Republican Congressman and CEO of Truth Social, Devin Nunes. Devin Nunes, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Devin, to begin, Elon Musk has spoken about the need for free speech. So what does Musk's Twitter takeover mean for free speech? How might it change under him?
Well, I think it remains to be seen. Obviously, he's the richest man in the world, and I think there's some concern that comes with that. But here at Truth Social, both President Trump and myself were very supportive of it because our mission and goal here is to reopen the internet. So whether that is, I think, as President Trump said, one billionaire owning Twitter is probably better than all the insane lunatics that were running Twitter until a few days ago. And I think that's kind of where this stands.
And you know, one of the big arguments going on right now is that free speech is dangerous, and this is one of the narratives they're using. And you know, they're saying that if free speech is allowed to happen, it's a threat to democracy, it's a threat to the basic safety of public officials. What's your take on this?
Well, look, it's a very common thought throughout history. It just happens to be the thought of dictators of all sorts and all sorts of tyrants. I mean, I think it's most importantly the Chinese Communist Party. You look right there. I mean, look, just last week you had Hu Jintao, the former premier of China, was right in front of the supposed Congress. Xi Jinping rips him out of there. You see it all over these dictatorships where they immediately take control of the intelligence agencies, take control of the news media, and they push out propaganda. So this is a common tool, plain and simple, used by dictatorships, and we could go back for probably at least several hundred years to probably the beginning of the printing press.
And Devin, new leaked documents are showing that the Department of Homeland Security monitored Twitter and other social media platforms after the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe versus Wade. So what role do you see big tech playing in terms of national security?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of concern here. When I was in Congress heading up the Intelligence Committee, there was always that rule that any of the powers of the state were not to be turned against our own citizens. It was only to be used for our military and overseas purposes to track down bad actors, whether it was terrorists or people trying to commit cyber crimes or that sort of thing. What we're seeing here is there was clearly mission creep. And I was there at the time that supposedly, I haven't read these documents in full, I can't validate their authenticity, but I can tell you this, that we were not briefed on any sort of backdoor to big tech by any of the intelligence agencies and some of these big tech companies. So it's very concerning, and I think you also have to look at high-level personnel within the big tech companies at both Facebook and Twitter are people that had strong ties to the Obama-Biden administration. They had strong ties in some cases to the debunked Russia hoax that I spent so much of my career on, debunking the fact that Trump and Republicans were not the ones that were getting anything from Putin and Russia. It was actually the Democrats and the Bidens, actually. So these are things that we've been working on that actually over the years when I was in Congress that I'm actually shocked by this, and I think if the Republicans are to gain control in the next Congress, they're going to have to get to the bottom of what the hell happened here, because this is not something that should have been done. And look, and I was there at the time, and I'm just amazed by it.
One of the big narratives right now is misinformation, disinformation, and that's one of the big arguments that the Department of Homeland Security is allegedly using as well to try to influence content being posted online on Truth Social and other platforms. Another big argument they're using is that hateful speech and so on is somehow now illegal, and traditionally this was not the way that the First Amendment would be interpreted. How are you pushing back against this? How do we maintain free speech, including the freedom to make offensive speech? Because that is what's under attack right now. What's being done to protect this?
There's a lot of law based on this over the last nearly 250 years of our country. And, one of the things that we do here at True Social is, our goal is that we want a family-friendly atmosphere. We don't want any illegal activity on the platform. But when it comes to political beliefs, when it comes to people expressing their political or religious beliefs, that's where we draw the line. We are not going to censor someone or take away their account if they are just, for example, whether they think that face masks are great or whether they think face masks don't work. That's not something, that's a political belief. That's something that people have a right to believe in, whether they want to get vaccines or not get vaccines. And I think that's what we've saw degraded over the last year and a half at a very rapid pace. And look, it started, going back to the Hunter Biden laptop from hell. This is really where the big tech companies went full crash course into the censorship. I noticed it back in 2017 and 18. That's why I actually was one of the first, I think I was the first member of Congress to go to alternative platforms like Parler and like Rumble. And quite frankly, it's why I left the Congress, because I recognized that if the American people don't have an ability to communicate freely and openly to express their political beliefs, a Democratic Republic cannot stand. And, it's bad enough that they censored the Hunter Biden laptop, but then just months later, they kicked off President Trump off of all the platforms, and they kicked off millions of Americans. And so Truth Social, working alongside our great partner in Rumble, we are developing and reopening the internet so that the American people and ultimately people around the world have their voice back.
Hey, Devin Nunes, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be with you guys.
Now, folks, after the break, we have award-winning journalist, TV broadcaster, and radio host Steve Gruber. He's going to be joining us for analysis on key issues and interesting trends going into the midterms. All that after the break. Hey, welcome back to Newsmakers. Big question. Are women the key to this year's midterms? Both parties appear to be counting on winning the female vote. Republicans are hoping to win voters over crime and the economy. Democrats are banking on women showing up in force over abortion. In the 2018 presidential race, exit polls showed that 59% of women supported Democrats, 40% supported Republicans. But is that about to switch? Now, interviews with voters in battleground states show women could be backing the GOP, Republicans. That's over lingering issues of the pandemic, the economy, and wanting change. Now, speaking of the economy, a new government report shows Americans are spending beyond their means. The Bureau of Economic Analysis released its latest personal consumption expenditures index, and that index measures prices paid by consumers for goods and services. It showed consumer spending increased over 0.5% from August to September, while savings fell and also incomes only grew 0.4%. Experts say spending still outpaces income when you adjust for inflation. Now, in all the different parts of this, prices climbed 0.3% from August to September, but surprisingly, the index remained unchanged for the year. Now, joining us, another topic, is award-winning investigative journalist, TV broadcaster, and radio host Steve Gruber. And Steve, it's really great to see you here.
Good to have you guys. Thank you for having me here on the program. Thank you.
Pleasure. Now, midterms are less than a week away. What do we expect to see? What's your take on the way things are going to go with the midterms?
Well, I've been looking back at the polling, how it's been historically wrong for the last several cycles, undercounting Republicans. And this time, I think it's going to be a lot worse. Talking to my friends over at Trafalgar Group, Robert Cahaley says they've gone from being shy in 2016 to being fairly silent in 2020 to being just completely submerged this time around. And you look at what's happening in the polling. Right now, the Republicans are getting the edge, but I think it's going to be bigger than what we're seeing. I've been saying for some time, I think the Republicans pick up 35 or more seats in the House, 2 to 5 seats in the Senate. And you look what's happening. Obviously, the debate with Fetterman and Oz did not treat Fetterman well, not just because of the challenges he's facing medically, but because of the ideas he puts forth of opening up prisons and these crazy ideas that we don't keep criminals accountable for the crimes they commit. You look at Nevada. They're ready to make a change to a name in Nevada they're familiar with, Laxalt. In Arizona, another change coming. And so you look around the country, not to mention Georgia, where you see another change coming. These are all critical seats, and I think it's all trending toward Republicans. It goes back to a reset, basically, to about June 1st. Where the Republicans had a substantial lead. Then there was kind of the doldrums of summer, and Joe Biden had a couple of legislative victories. They did some victory laps. They thought that, this whole Roe v. Wade is going to drive voters for the Democrats. And you talked about women there a moment ago, Josh, but here's the fact. Yes, do I think women are going to be a key factor? Yes, I think so. But women are more concerned about putting food on the table, gas in the car, making sure they can get their kids, through Halloween now and now to Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas. These are all important things to moms. And then you look at the Latino voters. I honestly believe Latino voters are the biggest swing factor in this election. Latino voters are leaving the Democrat Party in numbers we've never seen before. 19% of the voting population is Latino, and Latino women. You look at some of those candidates in South Texas, like Mayra Flores and some of the others. These are the key, I believe, to the midterm elections.
And Steve, so if Republicans do win back control of the House and or Senate, what should be top of their agenda to really deliver some actual changes?
Well, I've got to be honest. I've been paying a lot of attention to this story from The Intercept about the backdoor portals into Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of this. If the government, under the guise of whatever it might have been, had direct access to control the narrative, to censor Americans like you and me and everybody else, and by proxy, we're using these high-tech companies and these multinationals, including companies like Verizon, to do their bidding, to tamp down conversations that you and I would have, to get rid of the Hunter Biden laptop while elevating stories that they want to control the narrative. We have a word for that in America. It's called censorship. Another word might be propaganda. I think that I would like to see a deep dive into all of this, because if the government had backdoor portals and sweetheart deals with all of these companies like Facebook, we know what Mark Zuckerberg did, spending millions of dollars in specific precincts in the 2020 election. It had great impact. We know what the social media companies did by rejecting the Hunter Biden story. It had great impact. We know that 6% of the Biden voters said if they had known the story, they wouldn't have voted for him. So when it comes to election integrity, a lot of different conversations to be had. But that one, to me, is critical.
Let's go further in on that, because the free speech issue is a big one. On the Hunter Biden laptop stories you just mentioned, Trump's been saying that the government intervention in that, encouraging Twitter and Facebook to censor that whole story, essentially, that by doing that, claiming that there was threats of Russian disinformation, and they took that laptop as being Russian disinformation, by doing that, the FBI, Trump is arguing, actually interfered in the elections and actually changed the results of the elections. And now you have Democrats saying that Musk buying Twitter and opening it up to, removing censorship, they're claiming that's a form of election interference. Steve,
right.
How is it election interference to allow for free speech? What's up with this narrative?
Let me clarify something I just said, just so we're clear on this. It's not the government encouraging Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or Reddit or the others to change their narrative. It's not that at all. No, the government and its agents had direct access to change the narrative themselves. They didn't need permission from Facebook or Twitter or Reddit or LinkedIn or any of the rest. They did it themselves because they were given backdoor portals with direct access. And so therefore, by proxy, by extension, the United States government, violating the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, the left screaming because they don't have control over one of the major, social media platforms, please. That's laughable on its face based on what we are learning now. Some of this coming from the investigation done by the Attorney General in the state of Missouri, some of it done by the investigations done by Ron Johnson, the senator in Wisconsin, and a whole host of other folks. What I look forward to is some real serious questions being asked of these people in January 2023, because when it comes to election integrity, nothing may have had more impact than all of these companies working in concert together with the United States government. And how appalling is that?
Yeah, well, it brings up the other big issue, too, of violations of the Constitution. Because the big argument going around was it's not censorship if a private business wants to censor us. I've never heard that argument before, 2020, after the elections. They're claiming that business is doing this is not censorship. But what about when government is using business, private business, as basically the glove to go and do this through? Where do you see this going in terms of litigation, in terms of challenging these things on a constitutional level?
Well, the first stop is going to have to be Twitter. Elon Musk now must have his hands on a treasure trove. He'll have insider information. He'll know who did what, at least to some extent. I'm sure there were some midnight parties over at Twitter when they knew he was coming, getting rid of some of the information. That's, completely plausible. They would get rid of some of the evidence, if you will. I don't know where it goes. I'm not a legal expert, but I know this. The American people know when they smell a rat. And right now they smell a rat, and they smelled it when Zuckerberg was in certain counties, blue counties, spending money on election workers and the county clerks and so forth. And they know when their own government has access to go in the back door and promote the narrative that the United States government prefers and silences everything else, like both of you and me and whoever else they don't like. If they don't like the narrative on COVID and where it came from, or the efficacy of vaccines, or what happened in Afghanistan, or more recently, what's happening in Ukraine, which millions of Americans are adamantly opposed to. And if they're changing the narrative to adjust and to impact and to influence millions of people here and around the world. I hope that there's an investigation. I hope there's some criminal charges. I hope, this is the word, I hope there's accountability.
Hey, Steve Gruber, thank you so much for being here.
Guys, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you know, big stuff actually going on right now. When we look at the elections, when we look at censorship, look at social media, all the things are pointing in one, I think, specific direction, as far as I see it at least, which is free speech is coming back. And the nature of free speech is that it's the marketplace of ideas. The founding fathers argued, just like with the marketplace of businesses and so on, that ones that work will succeed, ones that do not work will fail. And if you have free speech, the good ideas stay and the bad ideas die. And it's interesting right now that people are arguing that the powers that be cannot hold power if free speech is allowed. Why is that? It's because within the marketplace of ideas, bad ideas fail. And it seems that that's really what they're afraid of. That they can't push false narratives like the Hunter Biden laptop story claiming it's Russian disinformation. That they can't finance actual disinformation, such as claiming that Trump colluded with Russia to rig the elections. Turned out that that whole thing was paid for by the Democrat Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign, was falsified, fed to the intelligence agencies, which then misled the country and dragged a sitting president through the mud for 4 years. That kind of stuff will no longer stand if truth can be spoken, if people can see real information, and if it's not being censored, ironically, by some of the same powers that were lying to us about these key issues. And, you know, Tiffany, I think when it comes to the midterm elections, it's, of course, political divides and partisan politics, but you know, I'm wondering when we're going to get to the point where people stop caring about partisan politics, start caring about just basic economic values, basic free markets, basic free speech, basic constitutional rights, and the things that we used to hold dear in this country. And I'm curious where you see things happening with this.
Well, first off, what's fascinating with the whole Twitter and, you know, free speech area, what you do see now is a lot of, say, more liberal or progressive people fleeing Twitter for alternative platforms, which is interesting because we've seen that in the past, right? We have Truth, we just had Devin Nunes on, we have Parler, we have all these Gap, all these other alternatives, and now it seems many people are seeing Twitter as a potential threat and leaving it. So it's like, as you mentioned, markets, it's, well, there's a marketplace to create your own free speech platform, it seems. But on your second point, I think some of the uniting issues, as we saw tonight, is really the economy and inflation. It'll be fascinating to see if both sides can come to an agreement on how to tackle that. But then another threat was potentially communist China. That seems to be a very bipartisan issue. So it will be really fascinating to see where both sides in America can really stand united as one. What do you think?
Hopefully that'll come back. I think America does need to be united once again. And I'd argue as well there's an agenda to divide us. The nature of a country, what makes a country? It is people of different cultures, different backgrounds, different beliefs, coming together under one common idea. In most countries, that's traditional culture. This is why in many countries, you know, if you live in France your whole life, you can still not be considered French if you're not ethnically French. You can live in China your whole life and never be called Chinese. But you can come to America in a few years, become a citizen, and be called an American. Because the uniting ideas are under the Constitution and under the belief of freedom. And I hope personally that that is restored, that that does come back.
And that's all for us tonight here on Newsmakers, and we'll be back next Wednesday with a brand new show, and we look forward to seeing you then.